Secrets of Haunted School.
The first day of school was always an exciting time for young minds, but as the sun rose over the ominous, towering structure before her, Emily couldn't help but feel a chill crawl up her spine. The building loomed like a giant, monolithic skyscraper, its imposing brick exterior seeming to absorb any hint of warmth or light from the world around it. The archaic bell tower atop the school's center spire cast long, eerie shadows across the grounds, making the entire area feel unnaturally dark and foreboding. Emily pushed open the heavy, wooden doors of the main entrance and stepped inside, instantly assailed by the musty smell of old books and polished wood. The hallways were wide and dimly lit, lined with dusty portraits of long-dead teachers and administrators, their ghostly gazes seeming to follow her as she made her way down the corridor. The air felt thick and oppressive, as if something malevolent lurked just beyond the reach of her senses. Finally, she reached her homeroom, room 213. The door was adorned with a plaque that read Ms. Jenkins, and a small, framed photo of the teacher smiling brightly. Emily tentatively knocked on the door, her heart racing with nervous anticipation. There was no reply, so she turned the knob and pushed the door open. Stepping inside, the room was small and cozy, filled with colorful posters and neatly arranged desks. But something about it felt off. It was as if the room were empty, despite the desks and supplies scattered about. Emily walked slowly around the room, peering into corners and behind bookshelves, her curiosity growing more intense by the moment. Suddenly, she heard a faint whispering coming from the back of the room, near the window. Intrigued, she crept closer, her heart pounding in her ears. As she drew nearer, the whispers became clearer. "Help me," they seemed to say. "Help us." She turned around, expecting to see Ms. Jenkins standing there, but the room remained eerily silent. With a shiver, she realized that the whispers weren't coming from anyone alive. They were coming from the school itself. Something was very wrong here, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't figure it out soon, she might never leave this place alive. She walked over to the window, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere, and peered outside. The school grounds were expansive, stretching out in every direction, seemingly endless. In the distance, she could see a lone figure moving between the classrooms, but it was too far away for her to make out any details. Emily turned back to the room, her mind racing with possibilities. There had to be some way to communicate with the spirits haunting the school, some way to find out what had happened to them and why they were trapped here. She rummaged through her backpack, searching for anything that might help her in her investigation. Finally, she pulled out a battered notebook and a pencil and sat down at one of the desks. She opened the notebook and began to write, her hand moving swiftly across the page as she jotted down ideas and theories. She scribbled down the name Ms. Jenkins and circled it several times, wondering if the teacher was somehow involved in whatever was going on. As she continued to write, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were practically shouting in her ear. Emily covered her ears, trying to block them out, but it did no good. The spirits were desperate, and they wouldn't let her ignore them any longer. She knew she had to do something, but what? She glanced up at the clock, noticing that she was running out of time. She had to find Ms. Jenkins and confront her about whatever was going on. With a deep breath, she stuffed her notebook and pencil into her bag and hurried out of the room, back down the hallway. Outside, the whispers seemed to fade into the background as she searched for the teacher. She spotted her near the front entrance, deep in conversation with a man Emily didn't recognize. Her heart sank. She didn't want to interrupt them, but the spirits weren't giving her a choice. With a trembling hand, she cleared her throat. Ms. Jenkins looked up, startled, and then her face darkened. "Emily, what do you want?" she hissed. "I'm busy here." I think something's wrong," Emily stammered. "In the school, I heard whispers, and I think they're coming from you." The man beside Ms. Jenkins chuckled, a cruel sound that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "Oh, dear," he said, "she's been having quite the imagination lately, hasn't she?" He patted Ms. Jenkins' hand, and she managed a weak smile. "No, really," Emily persisted. "I think you know what's going on. Please. You have to help me." Ms. Jenkins' face twisted into a grimace, and she stepped forward, her hand clenching into a fist. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she growled. "Just stay out of this, and everything will be fine." With that, she turned her back on Emily and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of students and teachers. Emily stood there, feeling more confused and frightened than ever before. The whispers in her ear grew louder, more urgent, as if they were trying to tell her something important, but she couldn't quite make it out. What was she supposed to do now? Emily stood there, frozen in place, as the whispers continued to batter her ears. She couldn't bring herself to move, to go back to her classroom, or to confront Ms. Jenkins again. The ghosts' voices were growing more insistent, more desperate, as if they were trying to tell her something important, something that she needed to know. But she didn't understand what they were saying. The words were jumbled, indistinct, like they were coming from a great distance. She tried to focus, to make out individual sounds, but it was no use. They were just whispers, nothing more. With a sigh, she turned away from the crowd and began to wander aimlessly through the school. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the lockers and posters blurring together in a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. She felt as if she were in a dream, floating through a world that was no longer her own. As she walked, the whispers faded into the background, replaced by the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of students talking and laughing. It was almost comforting, this return to the familiar routine, the sense that everything was going to be okay, but she knew that it wasn't. The ghosts were still here, still trapped, still desperate for her help. And until she figured out what they wanted, what they needed, she couldn't rest, she couldn't find peace. Emily stopped outside of her homeroom, her fingers trembling as she raised them to knock on the door. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, before finally steeling herself and turning the knob. The room was empty, the desks pushed to the sides as if they'd been abandoned in a hurry. A single note lay on her desk, the paper crumpled and creased as if it had been written in haste. She unfolded the note and began to read, her eyes widening in surprise as the words finally began to make sense. The ghosts weren't trapped here because of something they'd done. They were trapped because of something that had been done to them. Something horrible, something unforgivable. And they needed her help to set things right. With renewed determination, Emily left the room and began to search for Ms. Jenkins once more. This time, she wouldn't back down. She would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Because the ghosts were counting on her, and she couldn't let them down, she wandered through the halls, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The whispers in her ears grew louder and more urgent, guiding her towards the library. Emily hesitated for a moment, her palms growing sweaty as she pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, the library was bustling with students, their voices a cacophony of murmurs and rustling papers. Emily scanned the rows of books, searching for Ms. Jenkins' familiar face. Finally, she spotted her in the back, hunched over a dusty volume, her shoulders quivering with each ragged breath. Emily approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Ms. Jenkins," she asked softly. The older woman started at the sound of her voice, her eyes wide and wild. I need to talk to you about something important." Ms. Jenkins nodded slowly, her face pale and drawn. "Come with me," she said hoarsely, leading Emily to a secluded corner of the library. They sat down on a worn leather couch, the old cushions creaking beneath their weight. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever it was that Ms. Jenkins was about to tell her. "I know what happened," Ms. Jenkins began, her voice barely audible. "I know what they did to you ... To all of them, and I'm so sorry." She reached out and took Emily's hand in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. "But you have to understand, I couldn't do anything. They were powerful people, and they covered it up. They made it seem like it was all a mistake. That the ghosts were just ... just haunting the school." Emily stared at Ms. Jenkins, shocked by the admission. "But why didn't you believe me when I told you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I've been trying to tell people for years, and no one would listen." Ms. Jenkins hung her head, her shoulders slumping. "Because I wanted to believe that it was all just a nightmare," she confessed. "I wanted to believe that it was all some twisted prank, that it wasn't real, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more the ghosts would find ways to get my attention. And eventually ... eventually, I had to face the truth. Emily nodded, understanding all too well the pain and confusion Ms. Jenkins must have felt. So what do we do now? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. How do we make it right? Ms. Jenkins sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping even further. I don't know, she admitted, but I think the first step is to tell the truth. We have to find a way to expose what happened, to make sure that it never happens again. She reached out and squeezed Emily's hand, offering what little comfort she could. I'll help you. Emily, I'll help you however I can. Emily nodded, feeling a tiny spark of hope ignite within her. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins, she said softly, and I'll need your help. There's more to it than just what happened to me and the others. There's still the ghosts ... They're still out there, trapped in the school, and I don't think they're ever going to be able to rest in peace until we find a way to help them. Ms. Jenkins' eyes widened at this revelation. You mean ... you can see them? She asked, her voice trembling. Emily nodded slowly. Yes, she said, but not like everyone else. They're not just random ghosts wandering around. They're the ghosts of the people who died here. They're still connected to the school, and they're still suffering. The two women sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Ms. Jenkins spoke up. We need to find someone who can help us, she said decisively. Someone who can listen to what you have to say and take it seriously. Someone who can help us bring justice to the dead and peace to the living. Emily nodded in agreement, but who would believe us? She asked, her voice tinged with despair. Who would be willing to risk everything to stand up against people like that? Ms. Jenkins' eyes lit up with determination. There's someone, she said, her voice steady. There's someone who has been fighting for the forgotten and the voiceless for years. Someone who has made it their life's work to expose the truth and bring justice to those who cannot fight for themselves. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Who are you talking about? She asked eagerly.
Subscribe for more.